So I'm thinking of one of my favorite podcasts is a true crime podcast, and the host went through a transition in the language they used about, often the stories were included characters who were prostitutes, and the transition was that someone came to them and said, that's not the right word because it's pejorative toward that person. You want to use the word sex worker because it affords them a kind of dignity. And what I was thinking myself, because I really care about this issue, and I think that I see it in somewhat your ways, I want to figure out a word for a consumer that sounds like a rape consumer, and I want to find words, language that really, in a clear way, talks about the violent victimization of people in this, industry that's exploitative. And I'm curious whether you have any ideas on that. How you would change the language from, sex work, and which sounds like a career choice, and things like that, to something that really captures the cruelty that you were speaking of this.
Wait a minute, Rachel. Let's take a couple of questions, and then you can do them all in one because time is short and we've only got one mic, so we can't share the mics around.
Well, maybe you answer to my question, but because I don't understand all what you have said. But if we want to decrease prostitution, we have to find the best way to do it. And my question is to ask you, each of you, what is for you the best media, the best way with the media to tell the reality of prostitution? Each one of you.
And we will use that as our ending point when everybody will make a comment. So I'll take two more points and comments. We'll go over here, and then the panel will be able to respond.
First, thank you so much for sharing everything that you did. It was truly amazing. All of you are just unbelievable people, and I feel like I learned so much just by being in your presence. So thank you so much. I first want to add on to what this first gentleman said, because I absolutely agree. In such a capitalist economy, the word buyer doesn't necessarily have a negative connotation. And I want to find a word that does have that negative connotation so we can reframe the conversation that we're having with people about this. But my real question is, and maybe this is the failings of the current feminist movement right now, but the conversation that I'm hearing a lot when people are talking about prostitution is this whole pro-legalization movement. And if women were only in charge of funds, or in charge of who they were, or who was buying them, then it would be an empowered position to have, because it is sex empowerment, it is body empowerment, and this is a lot of what I think the narrative is now, and obviously people who have never been in the trade, right? So I'm interested in what your response to pro-legalization people would be, and where do you stand on that?
So one more. I'll take one more. Yeah.
I just like to know, the panel's thoughts on, the movie Magic Mike, and if you have any insight into male stripping and male prostitution, and if their experiences are similar to girls' and women's experiences.
So we have, the last one was about Magic Mike. Any comments relating to male stripping? A question of whether there is another word, or how we would like to describe the purchasers' demand. A question around other ways of the media portraying it more positively, or the questions that relate to that, and then legalization, pro-legalization or against. So other ways of doing it. So what we'll do, we'll go along the panel for different comments on that, and then we'll see where we are with time.
Okay. We'll probably bounce back and forth the way
Exactly.
we always do.
That's what I'm presuming.
I'm
not going to try and moderate that.
To say, I wrote a book that was published in a few different countries over the last 5 years, and the most recent country it went out in was Italy. The title in English is Paid For, and because that didn't translate with the same connotation in Italian, we had to change the title altogether. So we chose the new title, Paid Rape, and I think that speaks to your question.
Thank you.
You know, because that's really what we're talking about here. And people get very bamboozled because they can't put those two words together. They can't fathom how rape can be paid. And they're thinking to themselves, well, if it's paid, it's not rape, right? But that's because people are getting very messed up about what consent means. Prostitution does not involve sexual consent at all. And if it did, there would be no cash changing hands in the first place. What's bought in prostitution is your silence. Your consent is not and cannot be paid for, because sex is beyond the laws of commerce. What's bought in prostitution is your silence during the sex act. So it is paid rape in a very clear technical sense of the term.
Anybody else? Benita? Do you want to talk about this, the language of the French model?
Put me on the spot all the time. Well, I guess how I would answer that too is, you hit it on the head, it's pay rape.
Right.
But I always say that women aren't prostitutes, they're prostituted.
Right.
Which means that something has happened to them. When she goes into that room, she doesn't call the shots. I don't care what you hear. He calls a shot. She just knows what to say because she knows what he wants. But you say anything outside of that, he's gonna show you what he wants. So I call women prostituted women, you know, and that implies that something has been done to her. It's not her, you know, like I say, calling the shots and saying what needs to be done.
Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna ask, I forgot
We
what
forgot
the
the
question.
some of the questions were, that's what.
Okay.
Legalisation question.
Legalisation. Oh yeah, you'd asked how do we deal with people. Well, you know, there's the full decriminalisation model lobby is very strong in the world right now. And when they say, and there's a lot of innocent, as far as their intentions are concerned, well-meaning people behaving like idiots when they speak around this issue, quite frankly, because they don't understand it. And they will bang that pro-decriminalisation drum good and hard and publicly without understanding that full decriminalisation of the sex trade means exactly what it says on the tin. It means full decriminalisation of all aspects of prostitution. That's your pimping, your brothel keeping, the whole 9 yards. So what that does, and one of our members is from New Zealand, and so she's a woman around my age, who campaigned for full decriminalisation since she was 16 years of age. And she got her full decriminalisation eventually. And she's never recovered from the difference of what that was like as an experience. To be prostituted in any circumstance is to be ritualistically degraded, so she was already living with that. But she saw a major difference. Once every pimp in the land was decriminalised, you can believe she saw a difference. These people have no idea what it is they're calling for. What she's described to me privately and many times, and what she's spoken about publicly, was the way that all of a sudden you had shifts, for example, 17-hour shifts, right? With music set to nightclub levels, with the heating set to accommodate the men who were fully clothed while you're walking around half naked. The clothing that you're wearing, the little of it has been stipulated to you, so you've got to wear 6-inch heels, it's mandatory. You've got to wear lingerie at night, it's mandatory. Or tiny little mini skirt during the day, it's mandatory. Every bloody thing was mandatory, you know, before the girls knew where they were, and the rates went through the floor. Because, you know, when you open up a trade like that to every man in the country, and you give the green light to every man in the country, go for it, it's legal now, you know, fully decriminalised, you inevitably change the landscape of what prostitution is, and always, always for the worse.
Rachel, can you explain how that's different with full legalisation, the difference between decriminalisation and legalisation? Right.
Well, you know, there's people using a lot of very confusing language around, you know, whether, look, I'll put it to you this way. If I go home now tonight, right, and someone's broken into my house and robbed everything in it, and I can't do anything about it because what they've just done has been legalised versus decriminalised. Does it matter to me whether I have no legal recourse? Of course it doesn't. It's the very same thing with two different names. And as far as I'm concerned, decriminalisation and legalisation are kissing cousins, and there isn't a hair's breadth between them. You know, I could get into a long conversation about how that's shut down, but we don't have the time, and I don't want to take the other speaker's time anyway. But I think we'll wrap up maybe by talking about the French model. Maybe Sherry would want to say something about how that's...
Yeah, I guess I just thought, when you were talking, I was thinking, and somebody brought this up in the audience, if there was a film or depicting something positively, that's positive here about changing our culture, and I remember recently talking to somebody, I think they were from Sweden, and they told me that now, because it's, you know, the Nordic model has been implemented there for many years, what would it be for a young boy to grow up thinking that he is not entitled, does not have access to women's bodies, and grows up with respect, compassion, what's a healthy relationship, and in a loving culture. And I think that we have to see something different here, and envision something different, because when you can envision something, then you want to strive for that. And I feel like when we can change and you know, when I think, you know, what Rachel said, you know, decriminalizing is just going to be an open market. But here goes, you know, these countries in France and that have, you know, passed the most comprehensive legislation that some of us don't even know about. This is happening where women are and money is going into, which is really key here, as you want to like shut this down and hold the buyers accountable, which we probably need another word for buyers too. Right. But we have to create options, opportunities, access to opportunities, because in this country it's not happening. And that's one thing we have to really address here, because we have to replace it. And we got to replace it with something, but we need a culture where everybody has opportunity and justice and access to everything.
Thank you, Sherry. For anybody who doesn't know about it, the Nordic model that we promote decriminalises people who are prostituted themselves and criminalises pimps and sexual exploiters of all kinds. Because really, when you look at the prostituted population, be they female, which they almost always are on the individual level, or you know, young men or trans persons, and you look at who's abusing them, you know, time after time after time, as in almost always, and I don't mean most of the time, I mean almost always, you're talking about men doing the abusing. Now I have heard of these rare as hen's teeth female sex buyers out there somewhere. I certainly never met one. Nobody rang up the brothel and asked me, you know, could I go down and perform, you know, sex on her. That never happened. It never happened to any woman I've ever met either. I could go on a real roll about that, because women are being held up now and used as some kind of, you know, the mythical female sex buyer is now being used as an excuse. It's a lie in order to try to balance the behaviour we're talking about here across the sexes. That's nonsense. But anyway, I've gone sideways completely in explaining what the Nordic model is. What it does is it criminalises exploiters, be they sexual exploiters or financial exploiters. And it opens up exit strategies and opportunities such as healthcare and housing and childcare, etc. But having said that, and it's very important I say this, I am not nowhere near impressed with the level of financial support that the governments of the world who've implemented this model made available to people in prostitution. There's not enough resources from what I can see. It's not being properly directed. I'm not seeing the broad range of programs I'd like to see. There is good work being done in a lot of places, but it's not what it needs to be in order to tackle the immensity of this issue. So as we implement the Nordic model across the world, and it's been implemented across 8 countries now, you know, we have to be very careful to remember that this model is like a 3-pronged stool. There's not 2 pieces of this, there are 3, and it's very important that we get all of those right.
Now, time-wise, we're coming to the end. So if everybody wants a last comment, we need to do it now before somebody throws us out.
I'm just going to say this really quickly. I know there were a couple of questions that were asked that I'm not sure everybody got answers to, but I know there was one about what's the best media. I would say all of them in order to spread awareness about this issue, spread our realities. So newspapers, newscastings, television, commercials, advertisements, sending letters out, email chains, any way possible. I think all of them need to be utilized effectively. There was a question on if male stripping and prostitution is similar. I definitely would say so. The realities are similar but not the same, and this issue does predominantly affect women and girls more than it does men and boys. However, I will never exclude them from this conversation because they're both prevalent. And there was one about what word we should use in place of buyer. Does anybody want to take that? Because I'm still trying to figure it out, and I still call them tricks because that's what I called them when I was in prostitution. But if there's a word that anybody else thinks is better than that, then we'll get back to you, whoever asked that question. We'll come up with something better.
I think it really speaks to the cultural reality that we're all living in when we don't have a word and can't even imagine one. You know, because really what they're doing is every bit as old as what's been done to women in prostitution, and we still haven't found an adequate name to describe it. I think that really says it all. When people tell me that we don't live in a patriarchy, I perceive them as, I always think of the goldfish floating around in a bowl that can't see the water because it's everywhere in its environment. That's how I feel about people who think we don't live in a patriarchy. The evidence of patriarchy is absolutely everywhere, and I think that that's probably one of the clearest expressions of it. We don't even have a word, you know. But well, personally, I call them punters because that's what that's just the expression. Like punters is the Irish version of, you know, Melanie's term tricks. So, but I'll keep looking for a better word.
You said prostituter once. You were saying there's people who are prostituted and there's a prostituter.
Yeah. Oh well, that's a quick little story about that. Prostituter, I think, is well. I was thinking of something more vulgar, Rachel. You know, I thought we were talking about something that really, you know, spoke to it in the nasty kind of way. But the term prostituter, I about 6 or 7 years ago was talking to a friend of mine. I was really excited about this, right? Because I'd invented this new term. It's called them prostituters. So I ring her up and I tell her, you know, we're going to be calling them prostituters. That's exactly what we should be calling them. And she said to me, Rachel, that word already exists. I said, are you serious? She said, yeah, that's a word. I said, well then why have I never heard it before? Why do we not use it? You know what I mean? And because I've talked about prostitution a lot and read a lot, and you know, never come across that word. I thought I invented it, honestly. So I went to the dictionary just to check the situation out, and there was the word right there. Yeah, so it does exist. You need to start saying it more.
In France, we use it as the French way, prostitueur, but it sounds like prosti-killer.
I like that word, prostituter. It puts the stigma, that stigma that we always held, back to where it belongs. And so, and I'm going to just leave with this thing, or this statement. I just want to see all of us sort of create kind of a revolutionary new way of thinking here. I really do. I think we need a whole new, like, how we are with each other and compassion, and how, you know, to change behaviors of men as far as women are concerned, and really put an end to this, along with so many other injustices at this point in our country.
I just wanted to quickly say one thing too about working with boys, because I work with boys. And one thing that I found out in working with boys is that the difference is that once a boy gets to be about, well, really physically different. He's big, he's tall, he's strong, he calls the shots. And a woman can't do that. That's one different thing. They can start calling the shots, say, well, you told me to do what? You know, and they won't do it. And the prostituter doesn't want to fight. He doesn't want that, you know what I mean? So that's one difference. But I want to say that we came a long way as this anti-prostitution movement. We came a long way, but we've got a long way to go. And it's gonna take everybody in here and then some, you know, to really put an end to that. I keep saying, well, I see this end before I leave this world. And to be honest, I don't know that I will. I don't know that I will. I'd like to. I'd like to say that my granddaughter and my great-granddaughter is never gonna be subject to this kind of treatment, torture. But I don't know. But it's gonna take all of us. Now, we learned a new word today, prostituter.
Yeah.
I challenge everybody. When you're talking about Johns, tricks, prostituter. Prostituter. Let's start getting that word out.
I just want to add something new, because I think most of the questions were answered, and I really want to thank you all for spending the evening with us. I just think you're an awesome audience, and I know it's been a long day and so on and so forth. But what I really want to say is, you know, let's not forget, I can't go too deep in it, and I'm frankly not the expert, that's Scale Dines. Let's not forget when we talk about media to talk about pornography.
Oh, yeah.
And what I'm going to say briefly in closing is, I believe it was Gil Dines, but it was certainly not me. It's somebody else's quote. I just want to be clear about that. Is prostitution is pornography is prostitution on film. That was you, Jeanette? Okay, cool. But so, you know, I just want to thank you all for coming, and I want to say that I'm going to end with that, and together we can.
Thank you.
I know you all want to join me in thanking the most marvellous panel. I think there are two things that we can totally say. There ain't no fake news here. But in addition to that, some of us began the morning at a panel in the UN, which Autumn spoke on. And at that point, she opened, or she might have finished by saying that actually prostitution is Me Too on speed.
On steroids.
On steroids.
That's right.
Me Too on steroids. Now, I think in the room we had the person who began Me Too from Hollywood, in the Hollywood part of that. And she actually said the important words that she wanted to join the experience of women in prostitution and those who have been sex trafficked into the experiences that she was talking about formally. And I think that's really important that that was acknowledged on that platform in the UN this morning, that we recognise that actually what's going on in the media and Me Too is actually a very big part of that, because it's talking about the formalisation of the abuse that many women in those films that you are talking about have experienced. The difference is, though, it's not the same as the experience many of you have had and have shared so graciously with us today. We are privileged to meet such valiant women in conversation, showing how they're thriving beyond that experience and enabling us to truly understand and walk alongside of you. Thank you.